Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here. Welcome to the video. Hope you're all doing really well. So today we've got a headset service for you. Those of you who are regular viewers to my channel will understand the amusing significance of me picking a headset to show you how to service. But I'm hoping this is going to be the first in a series of videos on how to service different parts of your bike so that you can do it at home, save a bit of money and save on replacing parts. Right, let's get on with it. But before we do, just don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share with a friend. It would be much appreciated if you could do that. So the first thing you need to do is find a suitable place to hold your bike, a clamp of some kind. I use this bike stand here. And of course, for this video, I am clamping the bike around the seat post. So in order to take some of the weight off the fork, we need to remove the front wheel from the bicycle. I would advise you open the clamp on your brakes. If you have rim brakes like me, open the quick release and wind it until the front wheel becomes loose in the fork, passes the fork stops, and then it should just pull straight out of the fork. If you have a modern bicycle with some kind of internally routed system that goes through the headset and the fork, that is going to complicate things for you, and I will have to cover that in another video because that's an entire video all in itself. Now these are Torx bolts on my particular bike, and they use a T25 Torx bit. On your bike they might be 5mm or 4mm Allen bolts, which is the most common. But whatever bolts they are, make sure you've got the right size driver before you try and open them. And not just that, but make sure that the key goes all the way into the bolt and bottoms out on the bolt before you start applying any force to the bolts. If you don't get the key all the way in and start to turn, you run a good risk of rounding off the head off your bolt, and then that's a whole new problem that you've got on your hands. Also, don't forget, lefty loosey, righty tighty. Make sure you're turning the bolts in the right direction. So for this one, I'm going to turn it towards the front of the frame, just like that. I'm going to do a couple of half turns just to loosen this off slightly. There we go. That feels loose now. I can actually turn that with my fingers. And the same for this one, but this one goes in the opposite direction because it's on the other side of the frame. Makes sense, doesn't it? There we go, that one's nice and loose now as well. If you leave these clamped, the pressure on the steerer tube exerted by the stem actually sometimes makes this bolt harder to remove. So if you loosen off these two bolts first, it makes this easier to take off. There we go, that one came out nicely. This is using a 5mm Allen key. Here we go, so we have our 5mm Allen key now. And we can start undoing that bolt. I'm going to place my right hand, now that bolt is slightly loose, I'm going to place my right hand on the bottom of the fork, or on the fork, just to steady the headset and the bar while I'm undoing this bolt, and to prevent anything from flying off unintentionally. Because the weight of the fork, in theory, may pull the steerer tube clean out of the frame and out of the stem. It's not going to happen in my case, but it's good practice to do it. Right, we can see that there's a little bit of grease here, and that grease has caused my top cap to stick to the bolt, but this should be removable. So take the bolt out. This is covered in grease as well. I've actually got a load of copper grease on here. Take off the cap and any spacers that come with the cap. Set these aside together so that you remember they were the first things to come off. So we can get this tool again, just loosen them way off and take them out. I'm still keeping my hand on the fork so that the fork doesn't drop out of the frame. Again, it's not going to happen in my case. I know that this stem has got a really good grip on this steerer, but just for safety and also for you at home in case that's not the case with you. We can pull up with the stem and pull down with the fork, and you can give it a slight wriggle just to get it loose if there's any corrosion or sweat or something that's sticking your steerer tube into the stem. There we go, that pops off there. You can gently lay down the stem and the bar in front of the bike. If you're worried about it hitting against the frame, you can wrap something around the stem, like a plastic bag or another piece of clothing. There we go. So I'm taking those two off together, and what has come out with them is a little compression ring as well, or a little collar. That should fit in the gap between the steerer tube and the headset bearing there, but it's come out with the top cap, with this cover, sorry. Right, now I can drop the fork out of the frame. At this stage, the fork should just freely fall out of the frame. I'm going to guide it with my hand that's still holding onto the fork so that it doesn't fall down abruptly and damage anything. So everything is just going to hang off the steel cables. Your fork, your handlebar, your stem are all supported quite happily by those steel brake cables. Those steel brake cables are capable of stopping a fully grown man coming down a mountain at 70 kilometers an hour. So they're not really going to have any issue at all supporting a 300-gram carbon fork, for example. So don't worry about that. But if you're using a hydraulic system and you have hydraulic cables, perhaps you want to use some cable ties around the handlebars and then just cable tie them to the frame to prevent any additional strain or unnecessary strain on the hydraulic cables there. So with the headset, you should have two sets of bearings, one at the top, one at the bottom. In this case, it's a tapered headset, so the one at the bottom is slightly larger than the one at the top. That's useful for when we're putting them back later. And because I greased my headset previously, the bearings are actually staying inside the headset with that grease. Yours may come out with the fork. So as you drop the fork out the frame, the bearing may come out with it as well. I'm just going to remove the bottom one now. These are not pressed in as such, but they might take a little bit of wiggling to get out. Just stick your fingers inside the bearing, grip it from behind, and kind of give it a little wiggle if it's stiff. You can also coax it out with something. But if you do coax it out with something, try and use something softer than metal, so don't use like a screwdriver because obviously that can damage your frame, especially if it's carbon. Use something like a plastic tire lever is probably a better option for that. So here's my bottom bearing, and as you can see, it's well greased and it's not too bad. Well, there's a little bit of rust there, but the grease has mostly protected the bearing. I'm guessing that edge there is at the back of the fork where the wheel is spinning, throwing loads of dirt and stuff around the back of the bike. And then we'll just take the one out the top. This one's also a little bit stiff. Give it a bit of a wiggle. There it is. So I'm going to take this old rag and I'm just going to wipe the headset as clean as I can with this. There you go. You can see all the dirt and grease coming out of the headset. I'm going to switch to a softer rag now, and to just go over it one more time. If you don't have rags available, one of my favorite things to use in the workshop is this stuff, which is hand towel on a roll, or kitchen paper or kitchen towel, whatever you like to call it. So I'm just using a softer cloth to go over it again. You can use some cotton buds. So get a little bit of WD-40 squirted onto the end, or dip it in the WD-40 from the cap of the spray bottle. And then we're just going to go around cleaning with this, and this will remove any dirt, grime or grease or oils that are still in there. This is if you want to be really, really careful about your cleaning and make sure you've got absolutely everything. There you go. You can see now it's gone a bit brown. And then once you've done that, you can use the clean dry side just to get rid of the WD-40 afterwards. So we're going to soak it up with the dry side of the cotton bud. There we go. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the fork now, and as you can see at the front of the fork, it's fairly clean, and then towards the back, that's where that rust buildup has occurred. So where the grease has been washed away by water slapping up against the back of the fork with the wheel rotating, it throws debris, dirt and water and salt at the back. So that's where the rusting has started. So same thing again, just take an old rag or paper towel or whatever you have really, bits of clothing that you don't need anymore, and just wipe that off. You can use your fingernail even inside your glove, look, and you can stick that up inside your rag and use it to get into that really tight gap around the headset crown. or the fork crown. There you go, see, and get all that gunk out of there. Then we're going to wipe off the rest of the steerer tube, like so. I'm just going to go over it again with a softer cloth. There we are, super. While we're here, we can also check the steerer for any damage. You can see that there's some wear to the steerer where it's been sitting on the bearings or sitting on the compression ring. But it's very, very faint wear. There's no serious gaps or cuts in that. I think I should explain why I have a piece of electrical tape here. So this actually covers the hole in the fork where the mounting bolt and nut is for the front brake caliper. So what I do is when I build the bikes, I make sure that that's clean and dry in there. I grease the threads to prevent the bolt from seizing. And then I cover the whole thing with a piece of electrical tape when it's all installed, just to prevent any dirt, water, or salt or grit from going in there. So by sticking a piece of electrical tape on there, I basically solve that problem. I like to go for compression plugs that are fairly long, because this plug is designed to prevent you from crushing the steerer tube with the pressure from the stem. It's also there to help pull the bearing assembly together. When you finish your service, we're going to tighten that bolt at the top, and that's going to push the bearings together with the steerer tube and prevent any play in the system. You just get the appropriate size Allen key, stick that in there, and it's a normal thread, so just undo in the way you would do any other bolt, like that. Give it a couple of turns until it's loose, and then you can pull it clean out of the steerer tube. This has got a little bit of corrosion on it, but it's nothing too serious. And this thing is made out of several different parts. We've got the main bolt, which, as you can see, I have put copper grease on. And then these three aluminium parts, 2 cones and a sleeve. If you so wish, you can just like brush down the outside of this with a brush, just to brush off some of that aluminium oxide. And like I say, you could spray it with something like a penetrating oil if you really wanted to, just to prevent any of that corrosion. But I'm just going to put mine straight back, to be honest with you. There we go. When you put them back, just tighten them up so they fit together. And then you'll notice as it goes in there, it's a really loose fit now. And if I try and tighten it, the whole thing just spins. So what you want to do is take it out, tighten it a little bit, and try and put it back in. No, it's still too loose. So we're going to go again. There we go. So now that's tight, or getting tight. So once you've got a little bit of friction on it, you can push it in. There we are. Once it's pushed down, make sure it's all the way in. So once it's in there and there's a little bit of friction on it, you should be able to tighten it up. Just stick your thumb on top like that. There we are. Now it's biting, and just tighten that up until it stops, basically. There we are. Perfect. So that is going to prevent that steerer tube from collapsing when we tighten our stem onto it. Okay, so this is what my desk looks like while I'm doing this headset service. So this is just a piece of kitchen towel I lay down on my desk before I start, and I lay all my items down on it in order. So this dividing line between these two rows represents to me my stem. So this is above my stem and this is below my stem. Okay, so it makes it really easy and difficult to forget where everything went. Okay, so for this part of the service, you're going to need some nitrile gloves to protect your hands from your chemicals. You're obviously going to need your bearing. You're going to need something to put everything in, some kind of tray or bowl. I use these cheap cooking trays or baking trays from, cheap $1 or £1 stores. This one is just a stainless steel baking tray. You're going to need a toothbrush, preferably clean, and a small screwdriver or a set of tweezers, and a small plastic pot or possibly a glass jar. I prefer to use a plastic pot simply because if I drop it, it's not a problem. When you're doing this kind of work as well, you're going to need some extraction. I have an extraction unit above my head here, which I've built into the wall. But if you don't have an extraction unit when you're dealing with your chemicals, you want to be doing this in a well ventilated place so that you're not breathing in any cleaning chemicals. For the cleaning process, I'm going to be using this. In here, I've got WD-40 from one of the larger container drums that you can buy. I don't use the aerosolized WD-40 in the spray can because when you spray that, it goes everywhere and you end up breathing loads of it in. So that's not particularly good for you. If I put it in an applicator like this, one of these is just from a garden store for watering plants. If you use one of these, you can regulate the pressure so you can obviously distribute your cleaning chemical safer. The reason I use WD-40 is because it's a really good degreaser. It cuts right through almost all bicycle greases there are on the market. It's very effective at cleaning almost everything. The only thing you can't use WD-40 on is very soft rubber seals on certain things. And if I ever come across any in a future video, I'll show you which ones I mean. But all these kind of seals on these kind of bearings, no problem whatsoever. You're not going to do any damage. You're certainly not going to do any damage to the metal. It's absolutely metal safe. The other reason I use WD is because where I live in Brunei, we don't have access to a lot of different chemicals or brands of chemical. So I use WD because it's accessible, it's relatively inexpensive, and like I say, I can buy it in large drums for the use in my shop. But you can use whatever degreasers you have available. Here are my safety glasses. I'm going to be using these while I'm doing the work, just again to prevent any of the chemicals splashing into my eyes while I'm working. Safety first. So, take your bearing. Now, what you'll notice with this bearing, if I can get it a bit closer to the screen, is there is a gap here between the two races. That is where you want to put your small screwdriver. So this screwdriver's got a very thin blade on it. We can get that right in between those two bearings. Once you've done that, it's a very simple process. You just pinch the bearing in your hand on the outer race and you give a little twist. It should pop out of the seal, and then if it hasn't come all the way out, you can just stick that screwdriver in somewhere else further down and give it another little twist. There we go. The outer and inner race have now separated from the bearing, and you can remove the seals as well. Give those a little twist and off pops the seal. Now, as you can see on this, that seal is really, really dirty. But the balls themselves, they look more than salvageable. They've still got their shiny color. So we're going to pop this out of the other race. So we've got our two races now, our bearing seal and our cage, and just start popping those balls out. Pop each one into the cup. Okay, so now all the balls are out, and we're left with our plastic cage here. I'm going to add a little bit of air pressure to my chemicals and give them a little spray down. I'm going to do the same to the balls, give them a bath as well. So they're now bathing nicely in WD. So I'm going to take my toothbrush. I'm going to start with the bearing seal over here. No particular reason, you can do it in any order you want. And I'm just going to wipe off that dirt with the toothbrush until it's clean. Again, be aware that these seals have sometimes got double walls to them, so dirt will hide in those two walls, and or they've got like a double lip to them sometimes. And just brush it out. There we go. It's looking much nicer. Set that over to one side. Do the same again with the other parts. Okay, so now all the bearing components are washed and cleaned. We can deal with the balls, which have been sitting in our WD-40 solution for a little while, and all the dirt and grime has started to come off them. Give them a good swirl around. What I do is I take a magnet. This one's on the end of a torch, but any magnet will do as long as it's a strong magnet. And we collect the balls on the edge of the container with a magnet. Again, if you've got ceramic ball bearings, this is going to be more difficult. Now we can see that I've got the balls completely separate from the solution. And then we can pour that away, like that. And then, with a bit more WD-40, we can rinse them off. Like that, give them a good old rinse. And then you can give them another swirl around. There we are. Collect them up again with our magnet. You can even hold the container if it's plastic with the magnet, and you can get rid of that solution again. So pour all that away, making sure you've not left any balls or any small parts in your pan, and you can pour your balls out. Now, I like to pour them out inside one of the rings here, just so I don't lose them when I let go of the magnet. There we go. So there's no more balls inside the container. And now what we need to do is dry off all these components. You're just going to take your items that have been drying on this piece and transfer them to the fresh piece and give them a wipe down. And then when I've done that and it's nicely polished up and I've checked it, I can go down onto that piece of paper there. Nicely polished. There we are. Right, that's looking better. You can use your trusty cotton buds, one of my favorite cleaning tools, and you can just go around it again with the cotton bud. There we go, see him nicely polishing that. And the cotton bud is also easier to go down into the gaps in those little recesses where the washers and things fit. Same for this thing, the cage. If you have access to some compressed air, you can give the holes a quick little blast. Again, make sure you're in a well ventilated area, you're doing it away from yourself. If you want to know how to make a homemade compressor for your little workshop at home, I've got a video on that as well. Oh, if you don't have an air compressor, you'll just have to go through it with a cotton bud like this. But it's a bit more of a laborious process, but it still works. The ball bearings have been sitting on this paper. I'm going to move them to the middle, like this. And then I'm just going to fold the paper over and give them a bit of a rub. There we go, you can see the dirt coming off them now. Okay, I'm going to transfer these over to my cleaner sheet of paper now. First thing you're going to want to do is change your gloves. So what I like to do is wear 2 pairs of gloves while I'm doing this job. And then I can remove the dirty pair off the top like this. And I've got a pair of clean gloves for reassembling the bearing. And for that, we're going to use Morgan Blue calcium grease. The reason why I'm using Morgan Blue calcium grease is it is a bearing grease. It does say on the back of the container that it's suitable for bearings and spindles. I generally use this for bottom bracket bearings though, not wheel bearings, because wheel bearings I like to use a much lighter weight grease. And I also like to use it in my headsets because it is water resistant. It does say on the front here, water resistant and lubricating. Let's rebuild the cage. There's various different techniques for doing this. You can lie it down if you want and push them in from the sides like this. The interesting thing about this is the moment of truth as to whether you've lost any of your ball bearings, because when you go around and the holes start disappearing and the bearings start disappearing, and then you realize, oh, you've got 1 more hole or 2 more holes than you have balls, then it's time to go back in your process and check again. Right, let's put a little bit of grease in the bottom here. Now, it's not like greasing a wheel bearing where you don't want to over grease it. With a headset bearing, it doesn't matter. You can over-grease it all you like. It's not a problem. If some of the grease squeezes out the edges after you're done, it's fine. You can just wipe it up. A wheel bearing, if you over-grease it, it's going to slow the bearing down a lot. But again, with a headset, it's not a problem. So liberal helping of grease in there. And then we want to put everything back together again. I'm just going to smooth that grease in with my finger a little bit, just to make sure it gets down in all the nooks and crannies. Right, now we can put the inner race back in, and this should be fairly easy. You just push with your fingers, and it should snap back into place and turn freely. Obviously, there's going to be some resistance because it's packed full of grease. So it's not going to spin, but you should be able to turn it. And I can. So I know that's gone back in. I also heard the click, the audible click as everything fell back into place. If you're having trouble getting the inner race back into the outer race, just place it down on a firm, flat surface and push with the back of your hand. Or if you're really struggling, you can give it a bit of a hit and it should go back into place. If you want, you put a little bit more grease in there before we put the cover back on, just to make sure it's absolutely full. Take the cover, stick the cover on top, and just press that in, working around the bearing, and it should clip back into place. Some covers are trickier than others, but you'll work it out eventually. Some bearings, they require you to put the cover on first, or the seal on first, before pushing the race in, because of the way the overhang on the inner race works. You'll work it out yourself if you find that you can't get the cover back in. Also, avoid bending the seal wherever possible, because any bends or dents in the seal are going to stop you from getting it back into the bearing easily. So stick all those things in there. All right, let's give them a scrub. Let's say most of this stuff isn't even dirt. This is just a bit of copper grease. But what I wanted to do was get my chemicals here nice and dirty for you, so that later I can show you how to recycle your chemicals as well. All right, let's give that a bit of a wash. I can go in there, take your bolts, give them a dip in the solution, and then give them a scrub. Just brush off the threads with your toothbrush. Don't forget to do the little keyway at the top. Scrub that out. There we are. Nice clean bolt ready to go back into the bike. Chuck that in there. Same for the little ones. That's fine as well. Give the parts a quick rinse down. And stick them out on our paper to dry off. There we are, all done. Can put that WD for recycling. This one I can just clean with paper. There we go, that's done. Okay, now we're going to use some compressed air just to dry them off. If you don't have compressed air, then you're going to have to use cotton buds again and paper. Like this. You can also, like say, use a cotton bud. Just clean it out like this by hand. But the air compressor makes life a lot easier. There we go, done. Okay, so on this side I've got a few parts left to clean, and on this side are all the parts that are clean and ready to go back into the bike. I did the top headset bearing off camera, and this one was absolutely fine. There was nothing wrong with it whatsoever. So it goes to show that the grease that I put in the headset when I first built the bike did prevent any water or sweat from corroding this bearing. This one is a lot easier to protect in some ways than the bottom one, because the bottom one, of course, is closer to the road, closer to the wheels, and just gets more water and dirt thrown at it. Right, let's wipe these down. These are fairly easy to clean. You can just give them a wipe with a cloth and it should be enough, because they're just either carbon or usually aluminium parts for your spacers. Oops, put that in the right place. And then this one here is a little bit dirtier because it's got some grease on it from when it was sitting on top of the headset bearings. So we're just going to give this a wipe with paper, try and clean some of that grease and muck off it. You can wash this one as well if you want in your solution, in your degreaser. Just be aware that a lot of these have got rubber seals on them, like this one. And these, this is a perfect example. This kind of soft rubber seal here does not like to be immersed in WD-40. It can actually damage the seals. So when you're cleaning this, you just have to either wash it with soap and water or just wipe it with a piece of tissue or a cloth to get the grease off it. I use a soft cloth now to do the rest. Good. And then just do the seal again with the soft cloth. You can put that seal back into the cap. It's there to prevent water and dirt from getting into the headset. Don't know how effective it is, but my headset was fairly clean, so maybe it's working. I'm going to rebuild the headset now, and I'll be using Morgan Blue Aquaproof paste, which is excellent at repelling water. It's a very viscous kind of grease, but around your bearings and other components that you want to protect, this stuff is absolutely fantastic. And for my threads, I will be using this stuff, which is called Copper Ease, but I've always known it as copper grease. Other people know it as Anti-Seize, and it is a copper-based grease, again quite thick and viscous, and this can be applied to the threads on your screws, and it just prevents them from getting seized together when they come into contact with salt and water and sweat and things like that. Absolutely essential if you're going to be using titanium bolts, but also fantastic if you use steel. I've noticed that the paint on the top of my headset here is actually chipping. There's poor adhesion between this outer paint layer and this black internal layer that they've sprayed on here. And so the paint is really easily lifting off. And I want to prevent that because I don't want that paint chipping to continue down the side of my headset. Nail varnishes are absolutely fantastic at doing little running repairs on your bike. This one is just a clear nail varnish, but you can use colored ones if you actually want to match with the color of your frame. So if you've got a little scratch or something, you can just go over it with a little bit of yellow nail polish. So anyway, what I'm going to do is paint around the top here with a little bit of the clear nail varnish. It's quick drying, and it would just prevent this from continuing, this chipping here. There, and just go around. There you go, sorted. We'll let that dry, and then I can begin putting everything back together. So take your syringe with your aquaproof grease inside of it, and you want to put a little worm in the gap here around the top of the headset and in the bottom as well. So I'm just going to stick a little worm of grease all the way around in the corner, if you like, where the bearing is going to sit. See how sticky this stuff is? Now, if you're having difficulty reaching up underneath, you can actually tip the frame back in the bike stand to get better access. The reason I'm not doing that is because I'd have to change my camera angle. You now take your top headset bearing and apply a little bit of grease to the bearing. So I'm going to put some on the outside. This is where things are going to get a bit sticky. And we're just going to coat the bearing in a film of grease, so that if any water does get in here and it sits against the side of the bearing, it's going to make contact with the grease, not with the metal. So when that's nicely coated in grease, just a fine layer, you can stick that in the top there and push it in, and do the same thing again for the bearing for the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to push this one back in. Before I do, and again, I'm just going to put a bead of grease around this seal, like that. There we are. So when I push it back in, there's some extra grease on the top here. So when I push the fork back into it, that's going to really seal up that part of the bearing as best as possible. So now I'm going to push this back in the frame. Because we've got a bead of grease in the headset as well, and this grease all around the bearing, it should stay in position. It's basically glued in with the grease. There we are. And I can let that go and it doesn't fall out. Now I'm going to put a little bit more grease around this part of the headset to receive the next lot of parts. Bead of grease around that top seal as well. But don't worry if you think you're over greasing it, because any extra additional grease that's there that doesn't need to be there will get pushed out over time. And when it does get pushed out, you can just wipe it off with a cloth. It's not a problem. It's not going to damage anything by having a little bit too much grease. Way worse if you don't have enough. Right, let's put the fork back through the frame. So I'm going to take hold of the bar and thread the steerer tube through the frame, like so. Sorry, my tripod is in the way. So the fork is now back into the frame, pressing against the bottom bearing, and the steerer tube has come through the top. And now we can start reassembly. At this stage, you want to hold on to the fork, and you want all the parts that you need to put on here within arm's reach. So put them on the desk behind you or somewhere where you can grab them without having to let go of the fork, just because you don't want the fork to drop out of the frame. So first we're going to put this compression ring back. There we are. And that squidges in nicely in that layer of grease. And then more grease. I like to put a little bit of grease around that gap there, again to stop water from getting down inside the headset. There, just put a little bead of grease around there. You can smear it in with your finger if you wish, but we are trying to prevent any more water from getting down inside the headset. There we are. Cover can go on. I'm going to put my writing to the sides, but if you want, you can stick it to the front if you like. For me, that's going to get covered by the stem, so I'm going to stick the Columbus logo to the sides of my fork where everyone can see it. And then on my sheet of paper, I have one spacer on the same row as this cover, so I know that spacer went on first. Now I have a gap between my two rows of parts, so I know my stem has to go back now. So slide on your stem. You might have to give it a little wriggle. Goes on nicely. So on top of here is going to go my final spacer and my top cap. With the top cap, if you so wish, you can actually put a little bit of grease in this hole. So when the bolt goes into the hole, it smears the grease out to the sides and you make a perfect seal behind your top cap. So any water that falls down onto your top cap doesn't go down the hole and into this bolt hole and rust your componentry inside here. Another way to prevent water from getting in is a piece of electrical tape across the top, or if your bike came with one of those rubber bungs for that bolt hole. So next I'm going to put the bolt inside the top cap, and the bolt has got grease on it. This is copper grease, and that's just going to prevent the bolt from seizing if it comes into contact with sweat or water. Same as if it's a steel bolt, it's going to prevent it from rusting. There you go. So right now we're just going to pinch it slightly. We're not going to tighten this up fully yet. We still have other things to do. Same for your two stem bolts. I've also applied a little bit of grease to those, and we can just put those in with our fingers at the moment because we're not tightening those bolts up just yet. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to set the bars up so that they're straight and in line with the front wheel, and I'm going to remove all the slack out of the headset system. So right now there'll be some wobble or movement in the headset because it's not tightened up properly. We pull the bearings together with this bolt at the top. So when we tighten this bolt at the top, it's going to pull on the compression plug inside the steerer and draw everything up together and compact those bearings down so that it reduces the movement in the headset. We still want the handlebar to be able to turn, but we don't want any wobble in the actual bike or the handlebars. So what we're going to do is just pinch up that nut at the top a little bit. So I'm going to turn this and just pinch it up ever so slightly. You'll notice that I'm just using my thumb and my finger when I use the wrench. I'm not using my entire fist and really ratcheting it down as hard as I possibly can. I'm just using my thumb and my finger. You don't need to apply much torque to this, and by using your thumb and your finger in this way, you're not going to overdo anything. So what I do is I pull the bolt until I feel a little bit of resistance, and then I stop. And then to get rid of the slack in the system, you just bounce the front wheel off the ground. Lift it up about an inch off the ground and drop it. And that bounce will jar everything in the headset and rock everything together. So if there's anything that's not quite in place yet, it should bounce it into position. Then, now I've done that, I've got more slack in the system and I can take that out. Again, I feel a little bit of resistance. Let's give it another bounce. That's good. Now, I can still turn the bar really easily. It's not getting in my, it's not draggy or crunchy or anything like that. You want it free moving, but I also don't feel anything in the headset there. I don't feel any side to side movement or play in the headset. There we go. I can tighten it a bit more, but that's really just resisting me now, so I don't want to apply any more force to that. Now I can do up these bolts here, but before I do, I want to make sure everything is in line. So there's a couple of ways of checking that everything is in line. You can just look down the front of your stem. Usually there's a gap at the front of your stem here where the stem cover goes onto your handlebar, and you can try and line that up with the front tire with your eye. Just close one eye and look down and adjust the handlebar until you think it's about in the middle. That's one way of doing it. A plumb line. This is a great way to find out whether your bars are straight. You can just stick the plumb line on your stem. You can go from the stem bolt across the top of the stem and make sure that that is straight, because if it's sitting perfectly straight in the stem, it should be perfectly straight on the bolt here as well. And you can just lower the plumb line down until it meets the area where the bolt comes through on the front brake. So that is pretty well lined up, to be honest with you. Let me see now. I just need to adjust it ever so slightly to there. Okay, now we're going to torque everything up. Be aware of torque settings. Make sure you check the torque settings, and don't just rely on the torque settings for the component you're tightening. You also have to check the torque settings for what you're tightening it to. For example, with this stem, the torque settings on these bolts is 5 Newton meters, but this carbon bar might not be 5 Newton meters. So you go around tightening these bolts up to 5, and you might end up crushing your carbon bar. You have to respect both parts. So if this can take 4.5 Newton meters, you have to respect 4.5, not 5. Usually I won't go all the way up to 5 as well. I'll go up to like 4 3/4, because I don't like pushing the maximums. The maximum torque setting is the maximum. Just a bit like when you drive your car, you don't drive at the maximum speed your car can go. You drive at whatever is sensible or whatever the law allows, because it would be crazy to drive your car at the maximum speed. Same sort of thing for these. Also, if you're given a choice of 2 torque settings, like I saw a very lightweight carbon seat post the other day, and it had 2.5 or 3, that was the choice. Go for the 2.5, because again, the 3 is the maximum. If the seat post doesn't move at 2.5, 2.5 is great. And also be sensible about it, because it's really easy to go over the torque setting and break something. So today I'm going to go to almost 5 Newton meters with these bolts. 4 3/4 should be absolutely fine. I'm going to make sure that my tool is fully inserted into the bolt before I start turning, and also that my ratchet is going in the right direction. There we go. I'm going to give that a little turn. switch to the other side, do the same again on the other side. I haven't had a click yet out of my headset, sorry, out of the bolt. I'm just going to keep going until I get that click. Little bit at a time for both sides. There we go, there's one. And there's two. So that was basically just under 5 Newton meters. And then we have to recheck as well. So go back to the side and just pinch it until it clicks again. 1, 2. The reason you do that is because with 2 bolts, every time you tighten one, the other one relaxes. So in order to get them to the correct torque, you have to tighten them again. But you don't change your torque setting. So you're not going to go over the 5 Newton meters, but you are going to get as close as possible to the correct torque. Check your manual of your torque wrench to make sure that you're not leaving your torque wrench wound up, because if you leave it wound up, you can damage the spring in the torque wrench. I've also replaced the little rubber cap on the top of my headset, on the top of the top cap. Now what I'm going to do is the safety check to make sure that what I've done is correct. The way we do that is we can give the headset a bit of a bounce. Is anything rattling? Can I hear anything moving in the headset? The next thing to do is to place your weight on the bike. So I'm going to sit myself on the saddle. I'm going to keep hold of the handlebar here at the hoods. I'm going to press the brakes and I'm going to rock the bike backwards and forwards. When I do this, I should be able to feel movement in the headset if it's not tight. If the headset is tight, I'll be able to feel the tire depressing. I might be able to feel flex in the frame or the fork, but I won't be able to hear any clicking noises. If you can hear some kind of clicking noise, that means something's not quite right. I can release the brake at the rear and do it again. And again, I shouldn't get any noises or clicking from the headset. You'll also be able to feel the movement. If you squeeze the brake and just put your hand around the collar here and just rock the bike backwards and forwards, apart from twisting motion, you shouldn't feel the headset moving at all. If you feel it move, it's not tight. You need to go back and repeat the last step again. In this case, as you can see, it happily moves from one side to another without much resistance. So there you go. That is how you tell. So that is how you service your bicycle headset. Any questions, leave them in the comments below. Always appreciate your input and your questions. And also leave a comment below if you'd like to see me do a bottom bracket service next. And there you go. Thanks for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. When you're out riding, do stay safe. And before you do any ride on your bike, after you've done some servicing to it, make sure you test the brakes on your driveway just to make sure that everything is working correctly before you go for your ride. Anyway, that's it. See you in the next one, folks. Bye.